The weather is really bad and it's raining heavily. Our protagonist works in a bookstore and is thinking to himself that he might not get any customers today because of the weather. But what if somebody forgot an umbrella? They might have to find a place to stay while the rain goes away, our protagonist thinks. And by offering them a warm place and being nice to them, they will probably buy some books as well. Now, we can see a mysterious woman out on the streets in the heavy rain, single-handedly fighting and finishing off multiple thugs. Even though she managed to beat all of them, she still got injured and is thinking she needs a place to hide while her self-healing takes care of her wounds. She then stumbles upon the bookstore of our protagonist. Because this was the only bookstore working at this bad weather, she wasn't sure if it is a trap for her or maybe destiny, that she can go in and hide while waiting to heal. After entering the bookstore, our protagonist welcomes her kindly, complimenting her looks and bravery because she was walking out in this awful weather. He's plotting in his mind what kind of books she might need and what approach does he need to have to sell her a lot of books. He also offered her a towel and turned on the heating, which was all suspicious to her because usually bookstores aren't as equipped as this one is. She starts to think if he belongs to some enemy faction because he definitely didn't have regular book clerk vibes. He starts talking about books, which confuses her a little bit since she couldn't figure out whether he is actually friendly or an enemy in disguise. She can read his body language and she realizes he is using psychological tricks on her, but she still doesn't understand why exactly. He offers her a seat and a hot beverage, and she tells him she was a victim of a betrayal. Now, two of them are having different thoughts. She's still trying to figure out if he is the enemy, and he's trying to understand her situation so he can sell her books. After she mentioned she was betrayed, he wanted to encourage her by saying that maybe she should take some positive from it and learn how to understand people better. She said he's right, but that she already lost so much and can only see the ugly side of the humanity now. So he gives her another advice again, saying that in the future, she shouldn't feel remorse for people who harmed her already, even if they were a really close person to her before. This makes her even more suspicious of him, but she goes along with him, asking what else should she do, and he tells her to exact vengeance. She shouldn't be soft on people who hurt her. In his mind, he's still thinking about the strategies of what to say to her to prepare for buying books from him. But she got surprised by this answer, saying that she isn't mentally prepared to do evil things like that yet. And all of a sudden he tells her, maybe you need to buy this book to learn more. She gets even more surprised again and even confused now because she doesn't understand why is he recommending her a book all of a sudden, whilst he's just trying to sell her book because that's good for his business. She agrees to buy the book and he gives her a library card to fill out, and after seeing her name, he realizes she is the only daughter of a rich tycoon and sees another great business opportunity to sell her even more books in the future. As she was leaving, he gave her an umbrella and she told him that maybe they could get to know each other a little bit more. Then he realized that his business strategy might have been perceived as flirting by her. But it's better to go with the flow, so he tells her his name, Lin Ji. As they're saying goodbyes, she is still suspicious of him, while he's just happy that he managed to sell a book today and do good business. As she's walking in the rainy street, she's thinking that maybe he gave her an order to finish off the traitor and afterwards come back to him to return the umbrella, but to actually come back after doing this deed. But all of a sudden, a mysterious figure of a man pops up behind her. But before we get to learn more about him, we learn more about our protagonist, Lin Ji's past. While he was sorting books, he found an old book written by himself, which woke up some memories in him of his past. And he remembered his old life when he was an ordinary man who liked reading books so much that girls that used to work with him didn't understand him at all. After getting back to his home, we can see a magical ring in his room, and this ring was conjured by Lin himself. He strikes it down with his fist, saying his wish. Please, let me own all the books in the world. Nothing happened, or so it seemed. He didn't realize, but behind him a demon appeared, who created a portal door to another dimension. And Lin immediately knew if he goes through the door, he will own every book in the world, but will not be able to go back to Earth ever again. Without any hesitation, he went through the door and was living as a book clerk for the last 3 years ever since then, on a different world. But he didn't mind at all. He actually liked it very much because he could read an endless supply of books and even help his customers with their life situations by giving them proper books. He remembered the lady that just bought a book from him and realized besides her, he didn't have customers in a long time. Now we go back to her and the mystery man on the street. She was walking right past him but realized that something was off since she couldn't move her hand at all. At that moment, the mysterious man turned around and said, "Oh, I see. It's that book." The blood in her veins froze as she realized something about that man. The rain was still falling heavily. And now we go back to Lin Ji sitting in his library with a new visitor, who was the mysterious man from a moment ago. But our protagonist already knew this man. His name was Old Wild, and he was there to return a book he previously borrowed. Two of them started talking about book that Old Wild borrowed, and Lin Ji said the book was written by a great author who passed away. The girl was spying this from the outside, and she realized that Old Wild is actually a high-level black mage, ranked destructive. There were 4 ranks: abnormal, panicky, destructive, and indestructible. Old Wild's real name was Frank Wild, and he was famous for the mask he wears and being half serpent-blooded mage. He fought against one of the 10 holy knights of the order and destroyed an area of 10 kilometers wide, hence the title Destructive. In this city, there aren't even 10 destructive mages, and on the entire world, less than 100. As the girl walked away, she was thinking about how Lin can just casually talk with someone of that power as well. Now we go back into the bookshop where Lin is thinking to himself that Old Wild is his regular customer and he needs to be treated accordingly. Old Wild was a loner. Even though he had 2 kids, they didn't treat him well. His wife left him and his colleagues were scared of him because of the way that he looks. Lin remembered when he met Old Wild for the first time 2 years ago. When Old Wild first entered the shop, he intrigued our protagonist both with his looks and his demeanor, and he was also carrying a mysterious book of high value with him. Lin offered him tea, which Wild refused because he looked scary and didn't want to take his robes, but Lin said he doesn't focus on the looks but on the heart. And Old Wild actually took off his robes, showing his scary looks. However, Lin found him more weird and scary because of the mask that he wore. Lin turned on his businessman brain and tried to figure out the best approach to make Wild his regular customer. So firstly, he asked him about the book that the old man brought, because it was a book about magical and dying languages. Wild was surprised because Lin could feel the magic from the book, which even other destructive mutants couldn't feel. So as our girl from the beginning of the story, Old Wild got suspicious of Lin and decided to proceed with caution. They started talking about the book, and Wild pretended as if he doesn't know much about it, but said he's studying those languages. And then he asked Lin to teach him more about it. This was a huge business opportunity for our protagonist, and he offered Wild a new book to read. This book was about the most complex dialect in China. The book's name was Devil's Language, and Old Wild immediately realized that and got extremely excited about it. Lin was happy that he could interest him in the book, and Wild asked how did he manage to obtain such a rare book. Lin couldn't tell the truth about book being from his original world, so he had to lie and said it's from a splendid civilization. Lin got a bit sad that he can go back to Earth again. However, Wilde noticed nostalgia in Lin's voice when he was describing this ancient and splendid civilization, and Wilde thought that if Lin is from this civilization, he's probably a terrifying individual. After they introduced themselves, back to present, Wilde said thanks to the Devil's Language book, he started doing a new research and he needs a new book on the topic. Lin was completely oblivious to Wilde's intentions, but his business instinct kicked in again and he wanted to offer him a new book to read. Now we go 40 years in the past and we can see snowy mountaintops and old Wilde when he was younger. He has reached the highest of the mountain peaks to speak with the imprisoned king of ancient mage knowledge. The mage king said a word, looked at the crow that was flying by, and it just hit the ground, losing its life like that. Old Wilde was absolutely surprised at how powerful mage spells are. The Mage King then explained to Old Wilde that mages control the power of word and languages. White mages write spells, and black mages recite incantations. He then gave Old Wilde the most valuable lesson and said that if Old Wilde can realize and find the sound of his soul and create his own language, that he would reach indescribable power. Now we go back to the present and a dialogue between Old Wilde and our protagonist, Mr. Lin. Old Wilde is saying he wants to borrow a book that will help him understand another book he has that's really difficult to understand and is a part of a single language. Our protagonist, Mr. Lin, asks Old Wilde to wait for a moment while he thinks about what kind of a book would help him the best. While Old Wilde is waiting, he thinks about Mr. Lin always being nice to him and always there to help him out when needed. Even after Old Wilde lost terribly after fighting with a guy called Joseph who was a divine knight, Mr. Lin was there for Old Wilde to help guide him to the right path. Old Wilde also thought that Mr. Lin is a learned hermit beyond indescribable power, because he could hide his power easily from Old Wilde. And he thinks that after 2 years of studying that mysterious book that's so hard to understand, Old Wilde can finally understand some parts of it, and it's all thanks to Mr. Lin, whom Old Wilde thought of as an omniscient and wise scholar. Old Wilde wanted to show his gratitude to Mr. Lin this time. Just then Mr. Lin comes back with another book, saying that it's a bold statement thinking this book will help Old Wilde, but Mr. Lin says he considers himself quite confident in this field, which is why he gave out the vibes to Old Wilde that he is a powerful scholar. After seeing what kind of a book it is, Old Wilde got completely and utterly shocked, asking Mr. Lin if he really wrote this book his own, which Lin confirmed with confidence. Old Wilde, still shocked, remembered the 3 mainstream religions that were known to him, but he never heard about the religion of cult of ghouls before. Old Wilde felt evil aura coming from the book, so he thought to himself that Mr. Lin has to be wicked if he wrote this book. And then he thought whether Mr. Lin is trying to start his own religion. Old Wilde asked Mr. Lin if this book was his field of study about the rituals, which Mr. Lin confirmed and said that he used to study it a very long time ago and that it was a destiny-changing book for him. Mr. Lin was implying that thanks to the study of this field, he could leave Earth and come work in an underground world as a librarian with possession of all the books. But of course, Old Wilde didn't know this, which is why his suspicions about Mr. Lin seem to be confirmed. Mr. Lin then tells Old Wilde that he didn't publish the book and that this is the only copy of the book, and then he thinks to himself that if he stayed on Earth and published it, he could have earned the title of an associate professor on Earth. Then Mr. Lin looked at Old Wilde again and said since they are acquaintances, he will lend him this book even though this is the only copy of it in the world. But if Old Wilde wishes, he could take another book instead. Old Wilde was thinking that he has to take this book since it's the only copy ever and it's written by this master. But Old Wilde wonders what does powerful Master Lin want from him. So Old Wilde says that it would be his honor to take the book. He then says that he feels a bit uneasy to receive such a valuable book from Mr. Lin, thinking to himself that maybe Mr. Lin wants to use Old Wilde as his test subject. Mr. Lin thought that he needs to utilize more of his business book selling techniques, then taps Old Wilde on the shoulder and says, "Don't worry, Old Wilde, I'm sure you will add more value to my book. Only when someone sees my work, then my research is worth it. As for this book, it's not important for me now. I have entire forests already. Again, Mr. Lin was implying that he doesn't need that one book because he just used it to get to his current position where he has a forest of books, meaning all the books in the world. Then he says he still possesses all the knowledge from the book and he could reprint it anytime. That's why it's not a problem if Old Wild borrows it. Then he thinks to himself again that Old Wild should borrow the book since he's a lone scholar, and if he published the book, he would receive wealth and fame which would heal his soul. And borrowing books to his customers and healing their souls was always Mr. Lin's top priority. Old Wild was again left in complete awe and shock, and he thought to himself that Lin is maybe teaching him that fame and wealth are useless, but Mr. Lin then says, "Feel free to recommend it to others." Old Wild agrees and thinks to himself that maybe this is the price he needs to pay to spread the knowledge about the book, to distribute the book with keeping Lin as an author of the book a secret. And that was precisely Mr. Lin's plan to heal Old Wild's soul, to make him publish it and become famous and wealthy for it. Old Wild thanks Mr. Lin for his guidance over the years, then starts conjuring something, saying that this is the token of his gratitude. It was a gargoyle that Old Wild received from his teacher after graduating. The gargoyle's power is that it can identify murderous intent by itself, and it has great magic resistance. Mr. Lin thinks Old Wild thinking that this token of gratitude is really valuable, and that it took a lot of craftsmanship to make it because it looks as if it is alive. They both thank each other, and Old Wild thinks to himself that one book from Mr. Lin could buy thousands of these gargoyles, that it's not that special. As Old Wild is leaving and saying goodbyes to Mr. Lin, he also says that he will give him a better gift next time, one that is worthy of an indescribable power. Mr. Lin says he can't wait, while saying goodbye to Old Wild. After Old Wild left, Mr. Lin is thinking to himself, what kind of a gift could he give me? Maybe another one of these gargoyles. As Mr. Lin stretches, saying that that's all the work for today, he notices a black goo rising on his table. The goo spells out letters, "Long time no see," and Mr. Lin screams in shock. "That's you?" Mr. Lin realizes that this is the demon that sent Mr. Lin to this underground realm, and tells him that it has been 3 years since they last talked, and asks if it's the time for Mr. Lin to pay the price for the favor that the demon has provided him. Mr. Lin thinks that this demon is actually quite friendly, since it had already helped him and fulfilled his biggest wish. Thus, Mr. Lin is not expecting the demon to ask for a big price. Then the demon sends a message saying that the price has already been paid and is actually the reason why the demon has awoken. Mr. Lin was surprised. Starts thinking, what did he do that made him pay the price already? Maybe because he let Old Wild recommend the book to someone? The demon responds by writing letters, "Yes," out of the black goo on the table. Mr. Lin asked the demon if the price he just paid somehow benefits the demon, and demon responded with "yes" again. Mr. Lin, relieved, says that there will be no issues then, since the price has already been paid, but Mr. Lin is suspicious because it was too easy. Now we see the man named Jack on a building balcony while the rain is still falling heavily. Jack is a mysterious man for now, but is a part of some special force unit. He receives a message over his radio that they have found the whereabouts of Old Wild, and that Old Wild just spent an hour in that bookstore. Jack gets suspicious and thinks to himself that this bookstore is maybe a hidden gathering spot for the black mages. The woman on the other side of the radio gets surprised and says she has to report to Joseph and calls Jack back to provide more info. And yes, Joseph is the guy Old Wild mentioned earlier in the story that he suffered a terrible loss to. Jack confirms the order and says he will return back, but at that moment we can see Old Wild himself behind Jack, saying, "There's a rat," and attacking him. Jack pulls out a knife to stab Old Wild, but before he does it, Old Wild grabs his face, utters a magic word, and Jack loses his life in the blink of an eye. A woman on the radio calls for Jack, but Old Wild stomps on the radio, destroying it, and saying that they should never spy on his place of residence. Thinking about Mr. Lin, of course, and saying that the punishment Jack has just received was too merciful for this transgression. Now we go back to headquarters Jack was supposed to report to, and we see that woman knocking on the door of a special knight, saying she has something to report to. We see the knight chilling in his chair. telling the woman whose name is Claudie to come in. The knight asks if something happened to the spawn of the magic mirror and says that those hunters are so annoying, gets so pissed, and while punching the table says he'll use the tombstones of their mothers as punching bags. Claudie, a little bit scared, says she has a new case for this knight. Knight asks what's more important than what Old Wild is doing, and she reports on Jax just losing his life a couple of moments ago, and said that he just discovered where Wild was before getting assassinated. The knight gets utterly furious, asking who did this, and then Claudie says it was Old Wild's doing. They thought he lost his life after the Battle of White Hills 2 years ago, but apparently he survived. The knight says he knew Old Wild survived and that nobody knows Old Wild better than him, and says that the finally old pest has come out of the sewer. The knight was surprised Old Wild is in Nokin region, however, and asks what he was doing at the 23rd Street, the street where the bookstore of Mr. Lin is. Claudie says that the report is limited since Jack didn't make it back to give a full report, but they know that Old Wild spent an hour in the bookstore. The knight gets angry, saying that it makes no sense for a black mage who uses words for his magic to go to a bookstore, and asks if there is any background check on the bookstore. Claudie says that bookstore is flagship of Ash Tree Merchant Group and is open for 3 years now. It has a good reputation but not many customers, and that the only thing about the bookstore that is a little bit odd is the owner who is not local. The knight says that the Ash Tree Merchant Group belongs to the Druids, who follow nature and forests, and that he doubts they have anything to do with the black mages, and because of that, the knight doubts that the bookstore is the gathering place of mages. The knight gets completely pissed then, runs towards Claudia and asks her what is the mission of their order of knights. Claudia in a trembling voice responds, "To eradicate evil and bring peace." The knight says that they cannot tolerate anyone who stands for evil or works with those who stand for evil, saying that Wild didn't stay in the bookstore only to chat, read a book and drink some tea. While these are precisely the reasons why Old Wild stayed there. The knight continues yelling in anger, saying that if Claudie really thinks that an immensely powerful black mage stayed at a bookstore for an hour only to do that, then he will need to put on the sharp mithril boots and kick Claudie a few times so she learns her lessons. Claudie, quivering in fear, says that the Ash Tree group of merchants who own the bookstore as well fund 40% of their operation as well. The knight realizes his mistake, exhales, and says that he will go to the bookstore himself to check out what's the big deal about this bookstore. As he's leaving his base, you can see many knights in a line greeting him honorably. He looks at the record of Lin Yi, saying he will personally get to see what kind of a being Lin is. Then we find out the name of the knight. Joseph Abraham. He was one of the 10 Radiant Knights, and a knight that beat Old Wild terribly once already. As the chapter draws to an end, Sir Joseph starts hallucinating again, seeing bright red light everywhere, and as a magic sword appears in front of him, Sir Joseph utters, "The curse of the magic sword, Candela."
We see Joseph drowning and falling deeper and deeper in water. Demon tendrils wrapping around him, and even an illusion of a mysterious man trying to choke him out. Joseph snaps back out of the hallucination, and he's on a rainy street close to Mr. Link's bookstore. Joseph is talking to himself, saying that the curse of the sword Candela activated again, and that's why he can't go visit the bookstore now. And the reason for the curse is a madness possessed by its original owner. This curse can drive people mad with hallucinations, and only extremely powerful knights can withstand this curse with their tremendous willpower. But the curse is activating again, before Joseph could find a suitable successor for the blade. Joseph thinks to himself that he is no undefeatable sacred knight, since he can't withstand this curse anymore. He's just an old cripple. Then he leaves down the street without going to the bookstore. Now we see drained corpses of enemies who attacked the girl from the beginning of the novel, and a man in robes, whose name is Helix, and who's a leader of the White Wolf clan. And Helix is saying that he underestimated the girl. After all, she was second in command, so it's understandable that she is not weak. And we see the girl again, standing in front of a burning building, and we get to learn more about her. She was a former second in command of the White Wolf clan, the clan Helix is the current leader of, and her name is Ji Zinsu. We see more enemies charging at her from behind, but she dismantles them without batting an eye. then asks Max to report on the situation. Now we can see Max on a rooftop saying that it's confirmed that Helix has become a total madman after receiving the spawn of the magic mirror, and that he has started a massacre among the hunters after taking it. Max warns G that they are outmatched, since Helix has allied with Casper, who's third in command. And we see another woman named Kay approach them, saying that Helix and Casper have probably planned this assault a long time ago, and that they are too powerful right now. Then she tells G that she got betrayed only because of that scheming bastard. Lee then thanks Kay, saying that the only reason why she survived the pursuers was thanks to Kay. Then Lee thinks about Kay being really impressive, since she can suppress the side effects of the tainted blood, meaning even when she's transformed, she can retain complete control, which is impossible for regular hunters. Now we see a man known as Rat Ryan screaming that Helix and Casper are close to panicky level, and that after Lee and Kay transform, they can defeat them easily. Kay absolutely despises Rat Ryan, but G said that they can trust him since he has a loyalty rune marked onto his soul. G then explains that Kay and Max are able to withstand the mind corruption of the magic mirror because that rune has been casted by the white mage. That proceeds to explain that all of them have tainted blood, and that hunting that cruel dream beast is a path they all chose to have. She lets out a battle cry, telling her hunters that there is no turning back now. They agree and follow her instructions. They leave, saying that this is going to be their last battle. They reach the church gate, which they break open and enter. Inside they find third in command Casper, and they get surprised, asking where is Helix and why is Casper alone. Casper laughs while G rushes towards him, suspecting that something is wrong. After flipping him over, she realizes he has started transforming, and takes a syringe to inject into him to slow down his transformation. Then she asks where is Helix, and Casper, while still transforming, screams, "His Holiness will come." Then Casper explodes, ending his own line. G, completely shocked and angry, breaks the glass mirror, while Max is asking her that they should ask Mr. Keywood for help. But G quickly declines Max's offer and gives an order to Kay to continue investigating. She then orders Ryan to follow her, and shocked, he asks, "Where?" while she utters, "To 23rd Street. Now we see our protagonist, Mr. Lin, sitting in his bookstore, drinking coffee and reading a book, while thinking to himself that today is another day without customers. Since Old Wild and G, it's been 3 days without any customers. He then thinks to himself that he's only scraping by because of that black lady who is financing the bookstore, and Lin hopes that the book he recommended to this black lady can be of any help to her. He then thinks that he should devise strategies how to share books better, since he's probably not getting any customers with weather being as bad as it is today. And in that moment, somebody enters the bookstore. It's Miss G, dressed in a beautiful dress, which leaves Mr. Lin a bit surprised, but he happily welcomes her in. He then remembers that she's a daughter of a rich tycoon, and that this is his chance to make his business prosper by making her his regular customer. He tells her that he didn't expect her to come back so soon, and that she's the first person ever to visit his bookstore after only 3 days. G's thinking to himself that Mr. Lin is disappointed in her, and after giving her such a great guidance the last time, she still came back to him asking for more help. She then notices the gargoyle that Mr. Lin received from Old Wild, and thinks to herself if that's the mage's gargoyle, and even though it didn't move, she feels a powerful aura coming from him. She continues thinking about Mr. Lin trying to pretend to be a normal person, but he's displaying this gargoyle. Is he trying to comfort her and treat her with forgiveness and encouragement like before? She then apologizes to Mr. Lin for disappointing him, and in that moment Rat Ryan enters the bookstore, asking G if this is the place where she is taking him. He gets surprised after seeing Mr. Lin and thinking, why did the boss take me to see a normal person? Mr. Lin asks about who this guy is, and she explains, telling this is her subordinate, saying that he is completely loyal. Mr. Lin then starts pouring coffee and thinks that Ji got traumatized by that bastard who Ji mentioned in the chapter 1 and for whom Mr. Lin told her to need to get the revenge against. Mr. Lin thinks she was traumatized by this guy so much because when she introduces other people, she needs to say they are loyal. But then Mr. Lin realizes that if she took his advice and listened to him and got revenge, she should feel more confident now. And why did she just say she disappointed Mr. Lin? He asks her if she failed doing this and offers her coffee. Ji thinks to herself that even though she didn't say it, Mr. Lin already knows this, so she tells him that yes, she had failed. They're talking about different people, however. Ji's talking about Helix and wanting to end his life, while Mr. Lin is thinking that the guy is her ex who betrayed her. Ji then proceeds to explain that he got away and she couldn't get her revenge. She asked others to search for him but they couldn't find him yet, and then she fought him for 2 days, and after receiving Mr. Lin's teachings, she started pushing him back, even destroying his base, and even though she paid a heavy price, he still managed to escape because Ji has underestimated him. She then apologizes to Mr. Lin because she got careless. Mr. Lin, with a happy face, says that it's not her fault, and while he sips his coffee, he gets completely and utterly confused, not realizing what's going on because he is thinking that the guy Ji is talking about is her ex. Why is she talking about romance like fighting someone, he wonders, and thinks there's a saying, love is like shopping, and shopping is like fighting, so logically, love is like fighting. Lin thinks that Ji is used to business terminology since her father is a tycoon, and that's why she's describing it like that, and he thinks he understands it now. He thinks she meant she argued with that guy for days, but only understood how clever he is at the end, and he managed to run away with her money at the end. He pours more coffee for Miss Ji and says that he understands. Miss Ji gets a bit happy and asks Mr. Lim what does he think, while we can see Red Ryan in the back completely confused because he doesn't understand what the heck is going on. And we go a bit in the past to learn more about Red Ryan. He's talking on the phone with somebody whom he told that Old Wild is in Nokin region now, and that person starts complimenting Ryan for getting this classified information easily. Ryan said, "Cut the flattery, I can serve someone else in an instant." The person on the phone thanks Ryan again and tells him who the next target is, and Ryan says that it's just a naive brat who believes that the rune of truth is safe, but that it's really easy to crack them up. And at that moment, Kay calls for Rat Ryan, telling him that G is looking for him, and that he's not gonna be a mindless rat anymore, but her subordinate. Ryan apologizes and says he's leaving right away, and while going, he thinks to himself that Kay has the ability to control lycanthropy easily, and that if he finds a way to do this, he can be the ultimate intel to destroy hunters forever. Now, lycanthropy is the ability to transform into a wolf or a werewolf, for those of you who don't know. Now back to the present where Ryan is completely confused, not understanding why is she talking to this man in such a way, as if he possesses some kind of indescribable power, but is just a normal human. She then asks Mr. Lim to guide her, and he tells her that she doesn't need to worry so much, that it's actually easier than she thinks, that her enemy isn't that guy right now but other things, and that she fears the fear itself, and that she needs to wait for a bit, that good news will come. Ryan realizes that these are all lies and empty words, because Ryan knows them too well, because those are all tricks of a liar, and Red Ryan is a liar himself. Mr. Lin then quickly apologizes and asks him to wait for a moment, because his stomach started acting up since he drank too much tea, thinking he'll get no customers today. When he leaves, Red Ryan in a loud tone asks Gigi what the hell is she doing. She tells him to watch his tone, that she brought him here because he might have some useful intel, not because she trusts him or values him, and she calls him impudent. Ryan loses it and starts screaming that Mr. Lin is a liar. How Ryan is impudent, but he knows that. But that Mr. Lin's deception definitely needs to be worked on, and how Ryan can find at least 3 people with that low level of deception. He warns G that Mr. Lin is spinning her around, and then he feels G's blade at his throat, as she yells at him saying, "I knew I shouldn't have brought you. A wicked man like you only sees wicked things." She tells him that if he wasn't useful, she'd just end his life right there and then. Ryan thinks to himself that he needs to calm down and manipulate G, since he thinks she is so easy to manipulate, and says that he's loyal to her and her only, and that when Mr. Lin comes back, he will prove it to her, preparing his poisoned arrow to strike Mr. Lin down. At that moment, the magic gargoyle that Mr. Lin got from the old wild awakens, because it felt Ryan's murderous intent. It grabs Ryan, leaving G in shock, quickly pulls him close to his mouth, and devours Ryan in the blink of an eye. Then just before Mr. Lin returns, Gargoyle goes back into its normal sleeping form, looking like a statue again. Mr. Lin comes back, apologizing for leaving, and asks, "Where is your subordinate, G?" She's completely terrified and petrified, and answers in a shaky voice, "Something urgent." While still being frozen with fear, G starts thinking to herself how everything just now happened so quickly she didn't even realize, and she didn't even have time to react. The gargoyle attacked and swallowed Red Ryan so fast that if it was targeting G instead, she couldn't defend herself and would get completely obliterated by it, without even standing a chance. Is this what it feels to stare death in the eyes? She thinks to herself as the chills caused by the biggest fear in her life are running through her body. She then thinks that Mr. Lin realized that Red Ryan is a liar and wanted to finish him off, but didn't want to get his hands dirty by doing this job. That's why he left to a different room for a couple of moments, letting his gargoyle quickly dispose of that ignorant guy. She thinks that this is such a brutal but elegant tactic, and thinks that she shouldn't have brought Red Ryan in the first place. She then thinks that she angered Mr. Lin, and if he thinks she's behind this, what could he even do to her? But at that moment, Mr. Lin interrupts her thoughts, asking, "What's wrong? You look pale, Mr. G." He tells her to relax, that his bookstore should be a place for people who visit and relax. "Don't be scared. I'm not gonna eat you," he says. Miss G gets even more terrified now, if that is even possible, and starts shaking and apologizing, saying her subordinate was rude and that she shouldn't have brought him with her to the bookstore. Mr. Lin gets completely confused again, not understanding why she's so nervous and scared. Does she really think I eat people? He thinks. But there's no way she'd think something like that about such a friendly book clerk like Mr. Lin. He thinks that maybe she's just too naive and believes everything people say. That's why she got betrayed by her ex as well, Mr. Lin thinks. He then realizes that he probably earned her trust with soul healing her the last time she came, and that's why she came again, and is planning to do his best again to help her soul out. He apologizes for making jokes and asks Miss G if he can help her in any way. Miss G notices that Mr. Lin is calm, so she relaxed a bit as well, apologizing for her transgression and asking for a book to help with her willpower. Mr. Lin says no problem, and while finding a good book for her, he wonders why does she look so scared. He's only been gone a couple of minutes, what could have happened? Maybe it's because her subordinate left so suddenly, so Mr. Lin decides to comment about him, saying that Red Ryan didn't look right and it's better to not talk about stuff like absolute loyalty. She gets shocked thinking that Mr. Lin didn't say this randomly, that something must be wrong with the loyalty rune. She thinks that only white mages who make this rune can crack them, and that the mage that made the rune for Ryan works for her father Haywood, and if Ryan's rune is not working, her father is probably breaking the runes to manipulate other people. She comments out loud saying, "How can this be? Who can I trust?" And Mr. Lin, without a moment to spare, answers by saying, "Yourself. You can only rely on yourself." He tells her that she can never completely understand an individual and that the best way is to get strong in steel so nobody can defeat you and you don't have to rely on other people, and offers her a book titled How the Steel Was Tempered. Ji is shocked, but Lin tells her that after she reads this book, it will be really helpful to her. He then uses some quotes to encourage her and tells her, "Strike when the iron is hot. Man's dearest possession is life, and it's given to him to live but once." As she is leaving, he continues quoting more sentences from the book. Now she's walking down the street again and looks at the cover of the book for a moment and then opens it up. The book releases light particles all around Ji, startling her a bit, and then a huge demon eye appears above her. "The unending will of steel has a different effect on the power of the soul," is the quote she hears. Ji is left confused and not understanding what has just happened while she sees visions of the bookstore and the gargoyle in the bookstore. Then the vision zooms on the neck of the gargoyle where we can see people is swallowed, one of them being Red Ryan, whose rune of truth was gone from his neck. She then realizes that rune was indeed cracked and broken. The demon eye above her zaps her with dark energies. She feels pain and her nose starts bleeding, but in her vision, she finds herself in front of Red Ryan who's suffering. Now she's out of the vision, thinking how incredible Mr. Lin is. He changed her soul so easily and poured huge amounts of mana in her, and she finally has a chance to break through panicky level into a higher power level. She feels satisfaction overflowing through her body. She feels as if Mr. Lin gave her a second life, and thinks that Mr. Lin wants to help all the hunters gradually, step by step, and she thinks she finally understands his goals. She swears an absolute loyalty to him, giving her body and everything to him, and saying she will never let Mr. Lin down again. While sorting books in his bookstore, Mr. Lin turns around and sees Ji standing out in the rain in front of the bookstore, and he realizes she was there all this time. But why does she have a nosebleed? He wonders as she runs away. Mr. Lin then thinks that maybe she has a crush on him after being betrayed by her ex and being vulnerable, and Mr. Lin was there for her. No, that can't be the case, he thinks. I need to focus on the customers. And the chapter ends with Holy Knight Joseph standing in front of the bookstore. Now we get to see Radiant Knight Joseph in front of the bookstore, having a magical aura around him to protect him from the rain at all times. That's how powerful he is. He then thinks to himself that he doesn't understand why would a powerful black mage like Old Wild decide to spend an hour in this ordinary bookstore. But Joseph says that he can't let this opportunity go to waste and decides to go in to investigate. As he's entering the bookstore, he's thinking to himself that as a knight, it is his duty to protect law and peace. Now we see our main protagonist, Mr. Lin, just sitting in a chair in a bookstore browsing through books, and there is one book that he's holding in his hand, The Little Prince, and he thinks about how this book is a children's book, but it has so many philosophical points and it's both heartwarming and cute. He decides to read this book tonight before going to sleep, and at that moment the doorbell rings and somebody enters the bookstore. Mr. Lin gets excited that he gets a new customer, and then he thinks that Miss G is probably his lucky charm because every time she came to visit him, as soon as she left, some other customer came in. Now we see the imposing presence of Radiant Knight Joseph, and Mr. Lin also realizes quickly that this man has a threatening presence, but being a good book clerk as he is, he welcomes him and offers him his services. Radiant Knight Joseph is scanning the area with his magical eye, but he realizes that this is just an ordinary bookstore and that Mr. Lin is just an ordinary man, and doesn't understand why Old Wild would spend any time here. But then Joseph sees the gargoyle and thinks to himself that this gargoyle is the only out of the ordinary thing in this entire bookstore. He thinks that Old Wild wouldn't just give this gargoyle to anybody, and he decides to investigate a little bit further. Then he asks Mr. Lin if he's the actual owner of the bookstore, and before replying, Mr. Lin thinks to himself that this guy seems a little bit unsociable, so he decides to use an endearing and respectful language, and decides to call Radiant Knight Joseph Grandpa. When Mr. Lin says, "You're right, I'm the owner of the bookstore, Grandpa," Radiant Knight Joseph gets surprised, shocked, and completely angry. Even though Mr. Lin was trying to be polite, Joseph took this in a wrong way and took it as an insult, thinking to himself that he should bash Mr. Lin's skull in, but he won't do it since Mr. Lin is just an ordinary man and he can't go around bashing skulls of civilians. He then asks Mr. Lin if this gargoyle is his actually, which Mr. Lin says yes, a customer gifted it to me, and that's the reason why it's not on sale. Joseph thinks to himself that he would never want to buy something like this. What the hell would the Radiant Knight do with a gargoyle made by a black mage? Then Joseph asks Mr. Lin if Old Wild gifted this gargoyle to him. Mr. Lin answers yes, but thinks to himself that this man might have a grudge against Old Wild because of his threatening demeanor. Joseph is still a little bit confused and doesn't understand why would a powerful black mage gift a gargoyle this powerful to an ordinary man. Joseph says to himself that first he thought this is a gathering place for black mages, but after scouting it, he knows that this is just an ordinary bookstore with an ordinary book clerk. But maybe they're using this place to exchange secret messages is what Joseph thinks. So this place would be an exchanging point for the black mages then. Now we see Mr. Lin thinking and trying to analyze and understand what kind of a man Joseph is. He thinks to himself that even though Joseph has this threatening aura around him, he must be a good man and a gentle soul because he didn't break anything after he entered in the bookstore. And if he is a gentle soul, he shouldn't have a grudge against a literary student like Old Wild. Then Mr. Lin remembers a quote from Sherlock Holmes, which goes, "If you eliminate the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth." And he realizes, yes, and asks Joseph, "Are you a friend of Old Wild?" Joseph gets completely surprised, but he decides to use this for his advantage, saying that yes, he's known him for many years and that they've shed blood together in war, but that they've had a small conflict 2 years ago and he didn't hear about him since then. And while Joseph is thinking to himself that as soon as he sees Old Wild, he's going to rip his head off and break his bones, and that's basically what he already did last time they fought, but Old Wild used some unfamiliar magic to escape death and run away. So while he's thinking this, Mr. Lin is thinking that they really have a deep connection and a bromance and an enviable friendship. And he tells Joseph that he realized they are close friends because Joseph immediately knew that Gargoyle was from Old Wild. Joseph said that he's been looking for Old Wild all these years and asks Mr. Lin if he has the address of where Old Wild is right now, that he would like to pay him a visit right now personally. Mr. Lin says that he would gladly give him the address, but unfortunately that he doesn't have it. But he lets Joseph know that Old Wild borrowed a book and he will be back in a couple of days to return the book. And when he comes back, Mr. Lin will tell him about Joseph trying to find him. Then he asks Joseph if he would like to sit and rest for a while, and his business instincts are kicking in, and he asks him if he would like to borrow a book. Joseph sighs and says, "Do I look tired?" And he thinks to himself that even though Mr. Lin is an ordinary man talking to a super powerful man right now, he's still being really casual and friendly towards Joseph. And Joseph thinks to himself that nobody talked to him like this for many years, ever since he became a Radiant Knight. Then Joseph says that he isn't tired, but he has no reason to pass on a little bit of tea. But he will not read any books, since he doesn't like reading and he didn't bring any money with him. Mr. Lin thinks to himself that Joseph is incredibly arrogant judging by the tone of his voice, but that he is opening up right now. So he offers him with tea and tells him that he can read any book behind him for free. Joseph again refuses to read the book and thinks that his headache is getting worse and worse. And at that moment, Mr. Lin just slides a book to Joseph. Book's title is A Seed of the Abyss. And then also tells him that he's reading a fairy tale right now that's really relaxing and soothing for soul before going to sleep. And if Joseph wants, he can let him this book to read to help him relax his soul. Joseph scoffs and says, "Fairy tale? Young man, you're an adult as well. Why would you read such a book? That's so immature." Mr. Lin is a little bit disappointed because of how condescending Joseph is and tells him, "Suit yourself, but this book is really good. It's the only copy in Nokken region." Joseph gets surprised and asks Mr. Lin, "What? Are you certain this book is a fairy tale?" Mr. Lin, left a little bit confused, says, "Yes, this is the classical story." Is there any problems? Joseph thinks to himself that nobody in his right mind would call a book which name is A Seed of the Abyss a fairy tale story for kids that you read before going to sleep. Now we get to learn something new and mind-blowing twist. Books that Mr. Lin has and sees, when he gives them to his customers, they see it differently, and the book changes in according to what the customer's soul needs. That's why Joseph was surprised, because Mr. Lin was talking about a fairy tale, but the book's name was A Seed of the Abyss. But Mr. Lin saw this book as the story of Little Prince, which in reality is a children's book. Now Joseph gets intrigued, and because of this, he asks Mr. Lin to have a look at the book, but not because he's interested in it, but because he is a polite person who doesn't want to decline such a polite offer from Mr. Lin, who keeps recommending him to read this book. Mr. Lin thinks to himself that this grandpa is really like a macho man on the outside, but he's really soft and has a woman's heart on the inside. And as he offers Joseph the book, and as soon Joseph touches the book, he feels a familiar feeling of dizziness and pain. He realizes it's the sword Candela resonating with something right now. Is it the book, he wonders? He's completely confused, and while falling down to the floor, he remembers Mr. Lin saying bedtime. Is this what he meant? We can see Joseph fighting to stay conscious, but he faints and falls on the floor. Mr. Lin, completely shocked, screams, "Grandpa, are you okay? What is happening?" And as he's running towards Joseph to give him first aid, he's thinking maybe he had a stroke. And after checking his pulse, he realizes that Joseph's breathing and heartbeat are completely perfect and he's just sleeping. He's a little bit confused, but he says that Joseph has a better pulse than Mr. Lin in his prime, even though Mr. Lin is young and Joseph is so old. But then Mr. Lin gets scared a little bit again, thinking, but why did he pass out? Why did he fall asleep so suddenly? Is it something to do with the book? No, it makes no sense. Why would anybody pass out after seeing the Little Prince title? However, Mr. Lin collects himself and says, he is my customer right now. He passed out at the bookstore. I need to take care of him, make him more comfortable right now, and I'll ask him about it when he wakes up. Now we see Mr. Lin trying to lift Joseph up and carry him to a more comfortable place, but literally after using all of his power, he can't move Joseph not even an inch. After getting completely tired, he thinks how Joseph is very heavy and he's got muscles everywhere like a big brown bear. He thinks it would be much easier to carry Joseph if he was as thin as Old Wild. Then Mr. Lin thinks maybe another customer will come and help me carry him, but there's no way anybody will come at this time of night and at this bad of a weather. Then he apologizes to Joseph, saying, I'm sorry for doing something like this, but I can't do anything else. It's out of my power. And because he can't carry Joseph, he starts dragging him by his coat on the floor to find a more comfortable place for him. After placing him on a comfortable chair, he notices that Joseph has a mechanical arm and he thinks maybe Joseph is a cripple like Old Wild. But then he sees how complex and intricate this mechanical arm is, and Mr. Lin thinks to himself that there is no way an ordinary old man would carry something like this on him. Then Mr. Lin thinks that Joseph is maybe a high-ranked retired military officer because of his attitude, the way he looks, the way he acts, the way he talks, because he is so muscular for an old man. Yes, that's it, Mr. Lin thinks, because he already met retired military officers in the past and all of them have the same exact aura around them. Mr. Lin also thinks that he has to have PTSD because of his guarded attitude and that he also must see his lost arm as a glorious reminder of the battle he once fought. These kind of elderly people are always so stubborn. No wonder he seemed so arrogant before. Then Mr. Lin thinks that maybe Joseph's mechanical arm malfunctioned. He got some kind of an electrical shock from it and that's why he fainted and fell asleep. Then Mr. Lin thinks to himself that if somebody saw what just happened between him and Joseph, they would probably think of Mr. Lin as a serial killer who just murdered somebody and took him in the back of the shop to hide the body. No, there's no way somebody would think something like that, Mr. Lin thinks. I'm an upstanding citizen, and even though this scene is easy to misunderstand, there's nobody here to see. But then we see a cat peeking through the door and then runs away. Mr. Lin hears that somebody entered the store, but this was cat living, but he didn't know that, so he goes to check and he sees open door. After going outside to see what's going on, he sees this cat running away. He tells the cat, watch out, it's dangerous because of the weather outside. He thinks this is a regular cat, but we can see cat actually being frightened and having actual thoughts thinking how could this happen. Then after getting tired and running a little bit further away, we can see Cat actually speaking, saying the spell shape-shifting, and it starts transforming into a man. We learn that this man is a spy working for Secret Instrument Tower, and when we see his face, he's crying, thinking how could this happen. Then we get to learn more about this man and we realize he's Joseph's biggest fan, and he studied and worked very hard to join his order as a spy. And because he studied so much, of course he knows everything about Radiant Knights, their battles with enemies, and the battle between Joseph and Old Wild as well. After learning that Joseph is going to the bookstore to find out why Old Wild was there, this man decided to shapeshift into a cat and follow him to protect him if he needs assistance. But after realizing this is just an ordinary bookstore, he waited outside to get autograph from Joseph after he's done. But because Joseph took so long, he peeked in to see what's going on and what is taking Joseph so long. And when he peeked, it was at the exact moment that Joseph started fainting. Then the cat started thinking how powerful Mr. Lin is, because he could overpower and beat Joseph so easily. After going back to see why did he drag him back, he saw when Mr. Lin told Joseph, "Even a veteran like you deserves to have some sleep dreams." The cat misunderstood the situation and felt ominous aura coming from Mr. Lin, thinking he was casting some black evil spell on Joseph while Joseph was sleeping. Then the cat gets scared, realizes that if Mr. Lin is so powerful that he could defeat Joseph, he's probably going to finish the cat as well. He gets so scared and starts running away, saying, "I have to get out of here as quickly as I can. I'm so scared," sounding if he is about to poop his pants. Now we see the man shaking and quivering in fear outside on the rain, thinking, wow, this is how it feels to look death in the eyes. And he thinks that if Mr. Lin wanted, he could have finished him off, but for some reason he let him go. Why, he wonders. Does he want me to go back and report? We get to learn the name of this man, whose name is Morrison Gregg, and he decides that he has no other choice, that he has to go back and report this current situation. Then we see Mr. Joseph waking up and finding himself in the deep water again. What? Where am I? He thinks. Oh, another curse of Candela, another illusion, he thinks. But why don't I feel pain now? He then hears a voice. When you gaze into the abyss also gazes into you and recognizes one of its own. The voice was coming from the book, and the words from the book were overflowing Joseph's mind. Stop! Stop! It's too much! He yells. Then he hears another voice that says, I'm happy to finally meet you. Joseph starts to feel pain fading away, and he realizes that curse of Candela is finally lifted. When he looks towards the illusion of Candela, he sees a beautiful blonde-haired knight, the first owner of the sword, and the curse was now gone. This is that kind of a fairy tale? Joseph tells in his sleep, and as he wakes up and snaps back to reality, he yells, fairy tales are definitely for kids. While Joseph is still a little bit confused, and while waking up, we see Mr. Lin turning around and say, Oh, Grandpa, you're finally awake. And instead of getting completely angry like he usually would, Joseph puts on a slight smile, looks at Mr. Lin and says, Thank you. Mr. Lin says, no problem. How do you feel? Do you feel alright? Joseph thinks for a moment and says, I feel great. Better than before. Then Mr. Lin thinks that with Joseph's physique, there's no way he's anything else besides a retired military officer. He then realizes that his skills at judging people are becoming more and more accurate, and he thinks how Joseph is so strong, he could probably take someone's life with a single punch. He thinks if Joseph was to punch Old Wild, he would send his upper half of the body flying away. But thankfully they're friends. Joseph then apologizes to Mr. Lin for accepting his hospitality and then causing inconvenience for him. But Mr. Lin says, no problem, my job is to help the customers. This is what I also told Old Wild. Joseph says, I see, I understand, and thinks to himself that Mr. Lin, with his carefree attitude, will help all of his customers, no matter what affiliation they belong to. The moment you enter the bookstore, you become his customer and he will take the best care of you. And Joseph thinks to himself that he only saw this kindness and pure heart in one group before, among the elves. Ancient and long-lived race. It would make sense if Mr. Lin was also an elf himself. It's because he has lived a very long life that he has left the differences between good and evil Everybody is the same and he's trying to help everybody. He treats people with warm and polite attitude, and this elegance can only be achieved after years and years of refinement. And he probably opened this bookstore because of the knowledge he possesses. Joseph then remembers that Candela was the prince of the ancient elven kingdom who later became the moon king of the elves as well. But he was also the first to lose his mind. He finished his own life with his own sword, and the sword sealed his soul away. And that's how Curse of Candela was born, making the future wielders of the blade go crazy with hallucinations and eventually lose their mind and end their life as well. And before today, Joseph also thought that there's no way for him to avoid this curse, but this book helped seal this curse of Sword of Candela. He then realizes that only an elf could possess such a book, and no ordinary elf at that. This elf must have lived for thousands and thousands of years. And this elf probably used immense magical power to preserve this book in a perfect state. And that's why Mr. Lin probably doesn't have any magic aura around him. Yes, it all makes sense now, Joseph thinks. He then asks Mr. Lin, can he borrow the book since this was the only copy? Mr. Lin, happy to see that Joseph got interested, says, of course, I wouldn't recommend it if you couldn't borrow it. Then again, he turns his business mode on and he wants to give validation to Joseph because that's what everybody likes to get. And then he tells Joseph, from the moment I saw you, I knew this book was perfect for you. There's a lot of people like you who suffer great pain because of the turmoil and regret boiling within them. Makes them feel as if their strength was inadequate, which makes them doubt themselves, which eventually leads them to madness. Mr. Lin tells Joseph. Mr. Lin then thinks that people who saw Battlefield firsthand can never easily forget it, and they always carry those awful memories with them for the rest of their lives. He then tells Joseph that in the end, it's not the pain that defeats these kind of people, but their weakening kindness. Joseph then thinks to himself that he already saw two previous wielders actually succumb to this feeling of inadequacy, and asks Mr. Lin, is it wrong to be kind? Mr. Lin says kindness is not a problem. Weakening kindness is a problem. Because they have high expectations of themselves, they think of themselves as having big responsibility to other people, which in reality is their weakness. With that sort of weakening kindness, they can save others, but never themselves. And as soon as their spirit grows weak, they will become susceptible to everything. He tells Joseph it's okay to not always be the invincible hero. It sometimes takes more bravery and courage to be a normal man. And Mr. Lin thinks to himself that this is a great business strategy that almost made him tear up, that he sure is going to reach Joseph as well. Joseph finally understands and thinks to himself that it's not the curse that drives people insane and make them end their own lives. It's the pursuit of the perfection they chase. And he thinks, why did nobody ever notice this before and tell me? He then asks Mr. Lin, how long will I remain calm like this? And Mr. Lin thinks to himself that it's not going to last long because it's just a children's book. If they had a permanent effect, then there would be no need for psychiatrists. He then tells Joseph that it's not going to last long, but if Joseph allows Mr. Lin to help him, Mr. Lin guarantees a long-term result. Now what Mr. Lin is thinking, that this way he will gain a recurring customer, but Joseph gets completely surprised, thinking that Mr. Lin is actually asking to take the curse of Candela upon himself. Then Joseph thinks that people might say that he's already been wielding the sword for the longest, that he's already wallowing in his own failures before the sword even got the chance to corrupt him, that the invincible sacred flame used to sound intimidating before, but now it doesn't anymore. Joseph thinks that it was a good thing that he decided to retire. Maybe all of this happened just so the sword could find its next rightful owner. Are you certain? Won't it cause you inconvenience? It's not a simple matter after all, Joseph tells Mr. Lin, while thinking that Mr. Lin wants to take Sword of Candela under his own and wield the Curse of Candela, while Mr. Lin was thinking about consulting Joseph in the future and giving him more books. Yet another funny misunderstanding. Mr. Lin thinks of himself as a professional life coach, and since there was a misunderstanding between the two, he tells Joseph that there is nothing to worry about. You're barely holding on right now, correct? If you want, I can gift you this book. Joseph gets surprised, doesn't know what to say, and Mr. Lin continues speaking, saying, you've been carrying those burdens for far too long. You and your heroic comrades deserve to rest. Joseph is left in complete awe and admiration of Mr. Lin's selflessness, elegance, and grace. He thinks that only people who lived very long lives could achieve such level of these attributes. Joseph is happy and he answers saying that there is no need to rest right now. He will rest when there is peace in the world, and as he's leaving he asks if he can borrow this book. Mr. Lin says no problem at all. Just register your details here to borrow the book, and thinks to himself, yes, I've gained a new customer. Joseph fills in his details, bows down in gratitude and leaves the bookstore, saying that he has no more regrets and the only thing left for him is to serve justice. It doesn't matter if Wilde survived or not, because sooner or later, when Joseph gets his hands on Wilde, he will end him once and for all. Now, as the chapter draws to an end, we can see old Wilde in his chambers studying the book that Mr. Lin gave him, saying that the knowledge in this book is as vast as sky and as deep as the ocean. He is feeling an overwhelming euphoria as he's learning about secret sacrificial rituals from this book. It's a wild ceremony and a grotesque task. Then old Wilde turns around, looks at his black mask and thinks to himself that maybe it's time for the black-scaled faces to reappear in Nokken once again. He feels a hypnotizing greatness of emotions and says to himself, this is only possible thanks to Mr. Lin. I've prepared a special gift for him. I'm sure he will like it. If you want to find out what happens next, be sure to subscribe with bell notifications turned on so you don't miss out when the video goes live, when part 5 goes live. It should be out in a couple of days, so once again, don't forget to subscribe with bell notifications on. Thank you so much for watching the video. Again guys, yesterday we were at 1,000 subscribers after only a week of uploading, and now today we're already almost at 2,000. I can't believe what's going on. Thank you bro so much. I really appreciate it. Have a great day and peace.